For more on the impact of today's ruling, we turn to two experts in immigration law. Michael Heffman is general counsel for the Immigration Law Reform Institute, and Stephen Gonzalez teaches constitutional law at the Phoenix School of Law. Stephen Gonzalez, were you happy with today's ruling?
Well, I think so. I think that the plaintiffs, the Department of Justice included, pretty much got everything they wanted of substance. And as I said previously on this show, there were some very serious threshold constitutional issues here about the state interfering in federal power that have very long-term consequences. So I think the judge made the right call.
Michael Heffman?
I'm relieved. As one of the attorneys that was part of the Senator's Brain Trust that's worked on these issues over the years, it could have been a lot worse. We could have had a very radical judge. But the judge's ruling was very interesting on these key points that she preliminarily enjoined. Almost all of them were technical, and it will be very easy to fix. As a matter of fact, I was down in Virginia meeting with Virginia legislators on how to do their version of SB 1070 when we got the bill, and it was a sad face, you know, when the order came off the machine, and after we worked through it provision by provision, they were quite relieved.
So when Judge Bolton says today that, in fact, the state had overreached its authority, you think that's a technicality?
I think Judge Bolton gave the state of Arizona a B-. She said it was a good effort. You had a hard problem to work with, and she spelled out the very technical items that are needed to address 75% of the problems she identified in the bill. It's not going to go first to appeal or to the Supreme Court. It's going to go back to the state legislature, and they are going to make these technical amendments, and it's going to be an improved and better bill that faces judicial scrutiny.
Professor Gonzalez, is that what happens next from your point of view?
I have a completely different take. The way I look at it and looking at the opinion, the points fall along basically two lines, two columns, if you will. Pretty much anything in which the state tried to get involved in federal regulation of immigration, the judge said, no, you can't do that, that's federal power. The things that the judge upheld had to do with the state regulating employers and other traditional areas in which states have always been involved in. So I think if you look at it that way, it looks to me very clear that the federal courts here are, at least at the trial level so far, have struck down this law. I think it's left completely toothless. It's pretty much, I would agree it probably needs to be rewritten for those who support it, but that's because it was completely decimated by this decision.
But you just heard Michael Heffman say that other states who already have versions of this law underway don't feel the least bit deterred by this. Do you think that this drives all of those other states, it shuts down their efforts to try to copy what Arizona did?
Well, I think it's certainly a game changer. From a strict legal technical standpoint, the precedential value is not binding in other jurisdictions. It's more what we call persuasive value. But certainly any state that is looking at pressing some type of legislation like Arizona's has to think twice that now there's a federal court saying that it's unconstitutional.
Governor Brewer said today, Mr. Heffman, today that this is there's a sign to the federal government they need to step up their game at the border. Did the judge speak to that in your reading of her ruling?
Sure. Right in the very first line of the ruling, it says, against a backdrop of rampant illegal immigration, escalating drug and human trafficking crimes, and serious public safety concerns, the Arizona legislature acted. And I think she shares the concerns of the state of Arizona. She simply wants to make sure that this law in its final form will be fully constitutional and consistent with our concepts of federalism and federal supremacy.
Well, is the solution then for the state to rewrite the law or for the federal government to step in and to pass stronger law? Which would you prefer to see happen?
Ultimately, comprehensive immigration enforcement will have to happen at the federal level. But the federal government is not acting, and until they change their game plan, you will see more and more of these state-type measures. And they will be effective, I think, perhaps in a limited sort of way, but they will still be effective.
Professor Gonzalez, does this take the state efforts off the table, or does it throw a gauntlet down now to the federal government to step in?
Well, I would like to say that the federal government will now step forward and do what it needs to do. But the reality is Congress and the successive administrations in the White House have been paralyzed because they're really just reflecting the polarization of Americans on this topic. So I think until we get some strong consensus on which way to go, I'm not too optimistic, particularly in an election year. I do think, though, now with the federal court standing in the way and standing up and basically like an umpire blowing the whistle and saying foul, I think that definitely is going to put a pause in what the states, at least some states, are thinking of doing. And don't forget, the states themselves are divided too. Not all states are doing this. Some of them have strong majorities that feel the other way.
Was that foul? Was the whistle blown today, Mr. Hethman?
It wasn't a whistle blowing. I think Arizona got back their corrected midterm exam. And the teacher said, you did well, you're going to have to do better. And I'm sure the Arizona legislature and the governor and her council are already planning to do just that.
Michael Hethman of the Immigration Reform Law Institute and Stephen Gonzalez of the Phoenix School of Law, thank you both very much.